Hi, my name is Amy Wilcoxon. I'm a registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist here with United Medical ACO, back with our quick tip series of 2022. Today we're going to be talking about IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, which is a very common affliction in the world and especially in the United States. More common with women than with men, and commonly diagnosed at all different ages of life. So sometimes self-diagnosed, sometimes diagnosed by the doctor. So it's good to see the doctor if you think you have it. It's considered to be a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning your doctor will rule out everything else, that you don't have Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, celiac disease, and you have IBS. And what does that mean? Ideally that you go see a registered dietitian who will work with you on what to eat. So if you're not familiar with irritable bowel, or you're not sure if you have it, let's talk about what it is. So there's IBS-C, and there is IBS-D, and there's IBS mixed. And what do these stand for? IBS constipation, IBS diarrhea, and mixed, which means probably the worst. You go back and forth between the two conditions. So this is a condition that is very well managed through diet. There are medications, especially for IBS-C. There's some to stop the emergent diarrhea, but lifestyle changes are the most effective. So there's three things that really trigger IBS. One is stress, so sometimes counseling is really needed here. Other times we can get by with things like meditation, deep breathing exercises, yoga. For women, hormones, so depending where you are in your cycle, that can also trigger your IBS. And then what we're going to talk about today, which is food. So what kind of foods can trigger your IBS? It's good to know what your symptoms are because it's different for a lot of people. There are some very common ones, and we're going to talk about that today. But if you know that your stomach hurts or you have diarrhea every time you eat a certain food, it's probably one of your triggers, so you should avoid it. IBS is often not, it's not like a food allergy. You can have a food allergy in addition, but if milk triggers your IBS, it's not like a dairy allergy. You're just going to be very uncomfortable, gas, bloating, diarrhea. So let's talk about some of those more common triggers. One of the first ones for IBS-D is dairy. So specifically lactose, but sometimes it's also the fat in dairy because greasy foods, fatty foods also will trigger diarrhea. So that's one of the first things we look at and take out. When I see somebody who says, oh, I'm having all of this pain and every time I eat this, we say, let's take out some of those greasy foods, fast food, pizza, things like that. Ice cream, dairy, see how you do. Some of the other common triggers for IBS-D, it can be gluten. So that's something you don't want to just take out all gluten because there's some really healthy components in wheat, but if you find it's a trigger, it's a good thing to take out. And then for IBS constipation, eating a lot of insoluble fiber by itself. So there's two types of fiber. There's insoluble and soluble. So if we look at an apple has both, insoluble and soluble. So the skin is mainly going to be the soluble fiber. If you take off the apple, you're still going to get some soluble on the inside, but there's going to be less, and you might be okay. So how do I know if this triggers my IBS? If I feel really bloated, if I feel really gassy, and then I'm not able to poop for a couple days, this is probably triggering my IBS. So some other common triggers for IBS constipation, more high fiber foods like beans, chickpeas, things that are high in bran, again, and more insoluble fiber, but things like oatmeal, which are a combination of soluble and insoluble, might be better. Nuts can also trigger it. And then you also have to look at the ingredients in your food. So you might be eating a yogurt every day and say, well, this is Greek, it's low lactose. I'm okay with Greek yogurt. But this particular brand of yogurt has chicory root fiber in it. Chicory root fiber is a type of fiber added to a lot of foods that is very tough on IBS, causes a lot of bloating, a lot of pain and gas. Another very common ingredient is something called sugar alcohols. This is a coffee syrup. It says pure made, no sugars. That's a good choice. It doesn't have artificial sweeteners and it doesn't have sugar in it. But what it does have is sugar alcohols. So I can see in here that it contains 8 grams of sugar alcohol. And if I read the label, the second ingredient is erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol. Sugar alcohol does not raise blood sugar. It does not cause weight gain because it doesn't have a lot of calories. You can see this is 0 calories. But it may have a laxative effect. So it can cause gas, can cause diarrhea. Sugar alcohols are in a lot of keto products. They're in a lot of diet products. And they're in sugar-free gum. So with IBS, it's something that you need to be careful with. So let's talk about what you should eat and not just about what you can't eat. So we'll start with IBS-D, with IBS diarrhea. Generally eating a fair amount of fiber, because fiber can help firm things up, is helpful, but you want to make sure it's a balance of fiber. So fruits and vegetables, beans, some good whole wheat, high fiber bread. So for breakfast, I have oat bran, and then I have an apple with it and blueberries, and then I have broccoli and beans for lunch, and then I have some nuts for a snack. I probably have a little bit too much in for my IBS, so I may need to cut that back. And everybody, again, is different, so learning what works for you in terms of fiber. IBS-C, big rule is not to have insoluble fiber by itself. So if I have some nuts, some of these almonds here, these have a lot of insoluble fiber. So we should not eat these by itself. But let's say I have something else with it. I have it with my lunch, which has some soluble fiber. I have it with a banana, which has some soluble fiber, or an orange, which has some soluble fiber. That's going to be a little bit easier to digest. Another food I don't have here is popcorn, which is something that's very healthy. It's high in fiber, but it's high in insoluble fiber. So if I eat a big bowl of popcorn by itself and I have IBS-C, I'm gonna have a lot of gas and bloating. So one of the cardinal rules with IBS is to eat regularly. So going long periods of time and then eating a big meal, IBS does not like. So small frequent meals, balanced meals, so including a carb and a protein. Do not eat a huge amount in one sitting because it's going to trigger your IBS, especially that one for IBS-D. Be your best advocate for IBS. So if you know that a food bothers you and you don't want to be miserable, don't eat it because you know it bothers you. So let's say you've done all this. I added in my fiber, I watched my soluble fiber, I gave up the sugar alcohols, I gave up the chicory root fiber, but I'm still really struggling. What do I do? So the last ditch, one of the best things that you can do is to go see a registered dietitian and talk to the dietitian about the low FODMAP diet. So FODMAP, each letter stands for something. So fructose, oligosaccharides, and it goes through all of these foods. It's an elimination diet, but it's important that you don't do it by yourself because there's a lot of different versions out there. So you want to do what works best. So meet with the dietitian and then you cut out those foods that are all in high, and you only eat low FODMAP foods, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. Ideally, you're feeling better in that 2 to 6 weeks, and then you start to add foods back in. So if I'm following the low FODMAP diet, one of the things I would have cut out is lactose. So I cut out all cheeses with lactose, but I miss cheese, so I might add that back in as my first thing. If my stomach gets upset again, I know that's not a good choice for me, I leave it out. If I do okay with it, and then I keep going and I add in the next food. And then I'm left at the end with just a few foods that bother me. So that is something, again, the low FODMAP diet, which can be done very successfully to help the symptoms of IBS. Now, if you're not sure if you have IBS, you do want to talk to your doctor to make sure it's not something else. One of the things to remember about IBS is because of the stress component, it's different every day. So you may say, well, ice cream triggers my IBS, but not always. Some days I can eat it, some days I can't. So knowing that that stress component is in there. Exercise is a very good stress reliever. 20 minutes of exercise is like a low-level antidepressant, anti-anxiety. So that can also really help with IBS. Sometimes IBS sufferers find that getting in regular exercise helps manage their IBS symptoms better than a lot of other things. So certainly there are different levels of suffering with IBS, but hopefully some of these tips can help your IBS get under control. So thank you again for watching this quick tip series on IBS, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a good day.
Hey, are you interested in joining our diabetes support group? Click the link in the description below, and we hope to see you there.